Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Just to start with, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, like how you got into filmmaking, and then tell us how you came up with the idea for this app?
I spent 1 year in the US during high school as a gap year, and that's where I had my first contact with filmmaking. I had like a film production class and analog photography class, and that's what really ignited my spark for filmmaking. And back in Austria, when I came back, I finished high school, started a bachelor's degree in software engineering as a request of my parents to have a plan B if filmmaking didn't work out. So finished that, which is going to be interesting for when we talk about the app, because as I just said, I have this background in software engineering. And after the bachelor's degree, I started working at a software company, and at the same time also started on the side working my own little production company. So I started out as a camera assistant for like smaller branded content and image video stuff. And slowly but surely over time, I kind of like moved more and more in the direction of cinematographer and DP. So that's where I figured my passion was. I enjoyed lighting, I enjoyed working with light, shaping images, and I didn't really enjoy editing that much. So I figured out pretty soon that the best place for me was on set. And when I got more and more into cinematography, into the prep, into lighting, I started to take pre-production very seriously. And through that, I assume I started this Google Sheet that I used for myself, kind of like as a reference, just to gauge which lighting fixtures on my production level would get the job done. So just a quick info, I'm working on, I would say, medium-sized productions. Here in Austria, it's a little smaller than in the US. So oftentimes I'm DPing and I'm also co-producing. So I have like an idea of the budget. I have an idea of the lighting or kit budget. And I kind of also am in charge of the kit list. So I work with a gaffer together, but most of the times I also work on the kit list myself, because I know the budgets and I know which fixtures we can afford and which we cannot. And so I think from that kind of like, or from those limitations, I started with this Google Sheets calculator, which helped me figure out kind of like what lighting fixtures can we afford and what lighting fixtures would get the job done for our scenario. And I shared this with a couple of colleagues, and they all said this is very helpful. So initially I just shared the Google Sheets with other people, and they were like, this is great. This is a great base just to get a rough understanding of what lighting fixture does what. And they then urged me to actually turn this into an app, because they saw that this might benefit other people as well. And so exactly a year ago, pretty much, in June to July, I started turning this very rudimental Google Sheets into a web app with a developer. And in about, I think, November of last year was the first time when the app launched, basically. So it was 2 to 3 months of development. And in November of last year, LightCalc officially launched to the public.
So I see Shane Hurlbert's kind of talking about it here and there. The Filmmakers Academy, I think, his like companies. Is that something like positive to see, that the actual professional cinematographers are looking at it and using it?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing starting out or just launching this tool was really the question of, is this actually benefiting anyone? Is it maybe too simple for industry professionals? Is it maybe too complex for generic filmmakers? I'm talking more about content creators who are maybe not that technically adverse. And that was a big question for me personally, because obviously I kind of was in love with the tool. I created it, I built it, I thought it was great. Colleagues, my closer colleagues all said it was great, but it was always this question, is it maybe too technical or not technical enough for like professionals? And so when the first feedback started rolling in from like especially gaffers and DOPs, And they all said, well, it's just a great tool to quickly gauge at what do we need, what can we do within our budget. That was a really great confirmation for myself. And then the next part in this phase was the whole, well, I wouldn't even say marketing, but it was just like me reaching out to a lot of people, like film universities, film schools, blogs, magazines, among them Filmmakers Academy and Shane, where I just wanted to honestly get people's opinions on it. I was like really curious what industry professionals, especially in the US, think of the tool, also in the way that I can improve on it, right? What is it missing? What can be better? And when Shane picked up on that, and they agreed to test it basically, and he said, well, it's a great tool. He would love to collaborate and partner at Cinegear and incorporate it into his keynote. That was like a big moment. And I think that also gave the tool a lot of credibility, which I'm very thankful for. And he did an amazing job at the expo from what I've heard and what I've seen. So that was definitely a big confirmation for myself and the tool, yeah.
Awesome. Because I think, yeah, like a lot of the older kind of DPs are used to film and having like to know the numbers and like f-stops and things, whereas the newer kind of DPs or the content creators are just looking at the screen and thinking, oh, what looks good, maybe more light, less light, and then kind of going from there. They're kind of, I guess, a little bit less technical when it comes to, I guess, figuring out numbers and stuff. So if you want to just kind of talk us through like how exactly the app works and, you know, what would it be used for?
For me, when I started out in the Google Sheet, the first thing it really was just a calculator based on camera settings. So we all know our camera settings: ISO, frame rate, shutter angle, our shooting stop, T-stop or f-stop. And it was really more about, for example, if I shoot at bright daylight at noon, how much ND would I need? Like, is 5 stops going to be enough to shoot, for example, at an f1.4? So here in LightCalc, we have those camera settings. And if I change any of these, the required illuminance value here, which tells us how much exposure do we need for our scene to be properly exposed, changes. So that's really the most fundamental thing. So it's like, for example, a good example is high frame rate stuff. So if you're shooting at 2000 frames per second, for example, you obviously need a lot more light to expose the scene than you do at 24 or 25 frames per second. So if I change this, for example, to 2000 frames per second, you can see that the required illuminance is now 890 foot candles instead of 11. So that's really how it started out. It was a calculator to kind of gauge what camera settings in which ambient scenario would work, how much ND would I need, how low do I have to go with the T-stop. And that is also the first use case that a lot of users reported back on, is for high frame rate stuff, for example. Because obviously, if you're shooting 2000 frames per second, it's very, very hard if you don't have the experience to know which lights would get the job done. So the second thing I think we could take from here is if we hop over to the Ambient tab, that is where you can select generic ambient scenarios. So you have there different types of daylight, overcast, bright overcast, cloudy day. So these are like reference numbers and ballpark numbers for those scenarios, but you can also put in your own numbers. So as I just talked about, if we just said in that scenario, which I mentioned before, we're shooting at noon, clear sky, and we now want to set our camera settings, we can kind of compare these two. Where we have our ambient illuminance, for example, right now is 6,503 foot candles. So we probably need a lot of ND in addition to the 2000 frames we already dialed in before to get there. So that is kind of like the most simplest version of this tool. It's like comparing your camera settings to an ambient scenario and seeing where do you fall within that? Are you far off? Are you going to be way under or overexposed?
Right. How do you figure out the ND, like how much ND you need?
So in this case, if I want to figure out, let's start from here with the ambient scenario. We're shooting at noon, clear sky. That's roughly like I said, ballpark numbers, the base illuminance of that scene, so around 6.5 thousand foot candles, I would go into my camera settings and I would try to adjust these so that my required illuminance reads the same if I want to be at even exposure as my ambient illuminance. So in this case, 6,500 foot candles. So we just dial in ND. So in this case, if we do 2.7, which is, let me check, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stops of ND, we would land at roughly 5.6 thousand foot candles that our camera requires for perfect exposure, and our scene, our ambient scenario, is yielding 6.5K in foot candles. So now we could obviously, this is not yet a feature, but you could work with smaller increments in ND, or you can stop down the lens to get even closer. But you would really just compare the required illuminance value that is basically telling you this is the amount of light that your camera sensor needs to read for it to be properly exposed. And properly exposed in our case is at 80% middle gray. You compare this number to your ambient illuminance.
Right. And then in terms of like the sky, like are there, like in certain countries, is it brighter than others? Like in America, it might be brighter than, say, in Europe somewhere.
So I think that's the biggest thing when we talk about the ambient or the scenario mode, this ambient mode, it's really ballpark numbers, because like you said, you would need to have a reading for high noon at the longest day of the year, at the shortest day of the year, when the sun is obviously higher and lower. You would have it for different, latitudes, closer to the equator, closer to the poles. So that would be a lot of values. So that's why the second use case, and how most of the people who use this tool utilize it, is using custom illuminance values. Where, for example, you go on set during a tech recce or location scout, you know roughly, for example, you're going to shoot around that time. Obviously, predicting the weather is a little bit difficult, but you can actually take an ambient reading of your scene on the tech recce, and you can plug it here into LightCalc and work off of this. Works obviously great for inside stuff where no direct light is hitting. Otherwise, these numbers that we just talked about are ballpark numbers and can vary drastically from either time of year, obviously, and also different locations. So I think most people actually use this as a ballpark to say, okay, office lighting is roughly in that area. If I use this lighting fixture, I'm going to be safe enough. And I would say the more industry pros probably use their own light meter readings on set to plug it directly into the custom illuminance value.
Right. So this is a good way to kind of use in pre-production, use all the calculations so you can go to the producer and say, I need this light, or I need that light, I need extra money. If you want to light this high frame rate of like 100,000 frames a second, we're going to need more lights. Here's the calculations. You can kind of show them the proof. Exactly.
So like you just mentioned, high frame rate is one. The second one is distance, right? Key light distance. Obviously, if you want to put the light further away, you'll need stronger lighting fixtures. And that's also a great way to showcase in LightCalc, where you can just use the distance slider. For example, right now we're at 18 feet. And if you obviously want to put the lighting fixture away to get more even exposure throughout a certain distance and to get more even fall off, then you would need bigger lighting fixtures. So on the one hand, it is a very great tool for people who have the technical understanding, but in my opinion, it's also a great tool to learn. To learn about the inverse square law, for example, how the lighting output basically goes to 25% every time you double the distance, because it lets you play around with that virtually, and you don't need to have the on-set experience where you said, okay, well, I know from the recent shoot, an RE 18K is not going to give us enough output at full sun if we place it 10 feet away. well, you don't need that recent shoot now to play around with that in LightCalc and see it for yourself. So I think, like you said, frame rate is a big thing. Distance is also a big thing where you said, well, we want to put that 200 feet away. Is that going to be enough output or not for our scene? And the third thing is then the kind of like the combination of this ambient scenario and distance, where people specifically look to, for example, overpower the ambient light, right? Let's say you have a bright overcast day, we're at 500 foot candles, and you want to overpower that with your key light. That is also a very great way to utilize LightCalc, because you can hop in there. If you just, for example, go to, what is a full overcast day? Okay, 465 foot candles. And if you now hop into your key light, you can basically play around with the fixtures to see which light is going to be powerful enough to, for example, overpower that. Now, this is going to get a little technical. Let me know if I should already hop into this, kind of like bridging now the gap between ambient and now introducing the key light as well into this whole calculation. Or if you have any more questions before that.
For people kind of seeing, like maybe they've never heard of foot candles before, like what is that?
So in LightCalc, we have these settings tab where we can actually define our units to work with. The unit of length, we have meters and feet. And then in the unit of luminance, we have lux and foot candles. Foot candles is often used by, say, more professional DOPs and probably, more old school DOPs as well. And lux is, I guess, a more generic and unit of luminance, also mainly used in Europe. It basically is a indicator of the illuminance or luminance of a, either in this case, scene or of a lighting fixture. So I guess to simplify it for a lighting fixture would be how bright a lighting fixture is. So it's a unit of, let's call it brightness. Or in the case of an ambient scenario, it would be how bright the overall ambient scenario of, for example, a room or of a certain time during the day is or feels. And this is all in regards to what the camera sensor reads. So the unit of luminance in either lux, you can choose the different options here. It's an instant kind of like calculation. You can work in either lux or foot candles, kind of define the brightness of either the lighting fixture, which refers to the output of how strong it is to simplify it down, or in the case of the ambient scenario of how bright your ambient scenario is. Obviously, high noon full sun is way brighter, has way more illuminance than, for example, a dark overcast day. So I think that is the best explanation I have of the unit of illuminance, which you can toggle between lux and foot candles in LightCalc.
Right. So is foot candles kind of like, horsepower or knots? Like, is it an old school way of saying, like, they used to have candles and say one candle is worth how much? Like, what's the ratio there? What's the numbers?
Exactly. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 1 foot candle is the brightness output that one candle, like one old school physical candle, yields at 1 foot distance away. So if you take a measurement basically of the brightness of one candle at 30 centimeters or 1 foot, that would be equal to 1 foot candle. And lux is about roughly 10 times that. So it's roughly 10 to 1 is the ratio of lux to foot candles.
Okay. So for this one, it's saying you need 5,695 candles, basically, to power that scene. Yeah.
Exactly. So for this scene, I'm going to walk through from the very top because we still have, I believe, the ND in there. Exactly. So let's just go through an ordinary setting. Let's assume we're shooting at full overcast day, which gives us a base illuminance or brightness of 565 foot candles. That's just the unit. as is horsepower as a unit or knots as a unit of speed. So this is the first thing we're going to dial in. The second thing is subject. It was important to me to actually work with the reflected value of the light. So think about this. If you point a light source at a white paper, way more light is going to be reflected off of that paper rather than if you point it at a black paper. Even though the output of the light stays the same, the reflected light is vastly different. And that's why it was important to me to work with reflective or spot metering in LightCalc, because it is different if, for example, your key light hits a dark skin, or, for example, if your key light hits a very light-skinned person. But we can skip that for now. We'll use middle gray, which is the standard, I think, kind of like value for judging perfect exposure. So we dialed in our ambient setting. We want to shoot at full overcast day. And now we come to our camera settings. So if we hop over there, the first thing I would do is the ambient illuminance is currently that of full overcast day. So I would dial my camera in to basically expose my scene at key, meaning everything is properly exposed for the ambient scenario. So now we can tell that we have way too much ND in our camera because we would require way more light than the ambient is currently yielding. So just dial that down just until we're at a spot where we're roughly in the ballpark. And now here we have these kind of like yellow boxes, these dashboard boxes. And this black box at the bottom. We'll get to that in a second. So currently, I kind of dialed in my values. Oh, perfect. If I put t-stop to 3.2, the camera now requires the exact amount of luminance that our ambient scenario is offering. So our entire scene is perfectly exposed. And we can read that here in this yellow box, which is ambient to key, which means how much over or underexposed is our ambient scenario reading in camera. So just to give you an example, if I, for example, crank up my ISO from 800 to 1600, we now increased it by one stop. We now have our ambient scenario, so our base scene is now overexposed in camera by one stop because we lifted our ISO. So I'm going to revert that to 800. And currently, that would be the perfect setting to start with, because now we have our camera set for our ambient scenario. And now we can start working with our key light. And the key light now obviously is the lighting output of the key light obviously depends on which lighting fixture you choose, which modifier. So a modifier is, think of a softbox as a modifier, a reflector as a modifier, a Fresnel lens as a modifier. So everything that goes in front or on top of the light. With LED lights, you usually have a lot of modifiers like domes, the China balls. All of these things impact the output of the lighting fixture. You can see that very easily here. If we just look at the number output of our aperture 300D with the standard reflector, we're at exactly 1 meter or 3.3 feet. If I change the reflector, you will see this number down here changes dramatically, depending on which modifier we're using. And from here on, I would actually, for example, if we go for a bigger fixture and say we're going to choose an aperture 1200D, and we choose, for example, a hyperreflector, and it's at 18 feet, we can now see that the required illuminance that our camera needs stays untouched, is the same as before. So is our ambient illuminance of our scenario, because that's not affected by our key light. But what is affected by our key light is the subject. So LightCalc works on two layers. You have kind of the ambient, which you could think of the ambient brightness, the room brightness, and then you have your subject. So that's usually always like the person you want to film in that environment. And this tells us currently the key light is always pointed at our subject, so it doesn't influence, obviously, the ambient of the whole scene, but it influences our subject and our subject's brightness. And so if we just use those numbers at 18 feet with the aperture, we can now see that our subject would be overexposed by 1.23 stops. Why is that? Because there's more light hitting our subject than is required by our camera. So if we wanted to expose our subject just one stop, we have a couple of options to do that. We can either dim the lighting fixture, for example, to 70%, then we get roughly one stop overexposed. We could, if I reset that, we could move the lighting fixture further away, which reduces the brightness because the light is moved further away. Less light is hitting our subject, and thus our subject is getting darker and darker. Or we can put, in this case for LEDs probably not, but you could put color gels in. Color gels like CTO, CTB, they also reduce the transmission of light from the fixture. And I think this is the most useful setting for most users, I assume, in LightCalc, is where they can play around with different fixtures. And for example, see, well, if I were to put the aperture 1200D 50 feet away, I wouldn't get my subject to be that much brighter than the ambient. Now, if I switched it, for example, to an M90 from ARRI, I have additionally more wiggle room to play around with it and move it even further away because it yields more output. And so this is really, I think, where LightCalc shines, is where you can play around with different fixtures, like we talked about before. Either you're limited by budget, right? You have only a certain budget, you can only use certain fixtures, so you can test, okay, how close do I need to get that fixture, the smaller fixture, because we don't have budget for a bigger fixture. Or maybe I can make my case for a bigger fixture because we can place it further away and it opens up more room on set for everybody to work with. I think that's really where LightCalc shines the most, is where you can play around with the different fixtures to see what works for your budget and what you would need to, or where you would need to place the light for your subject to be properly exposed.
In terms of like a light meter, are you able to like communicate through the app, like to hardware, to be able to send information back and forth, or is that not available yet?
No, that's not available yet. So how people currently use it is they take a light meter reading on set, and then they plug it into LightCalc. But then again, I would say the use case for LightCalc is not to necessarily replace a light meter. And I see it less as a tool that you use on set on the day of the shoot, but more as a tool to test out in pre-production what would work, right? Because in pre-production, a light meter is not going to get you far in terms of figuring out if a lighting fixture is going to be powerful enough or not. You might know the ambient that you need, but you would still need to look up, okay, what is the output of an M90? Then you would plug it somewhere in an inverse square calculator to see, okay, if I place it 10 feet, 50 feet away. So I'd see LightCalc more as a tool that works, or that enhances a light meter in the stage of pre-production. But on the day of the shoot, if you're on set and if you're dialing in things, for example, if you're dialing in the key to fill ratio on your subject, or if you're dialing in, really nuanced lighting or nuanced shapes, or you're trying to shape your image, then I would always use the light meter. So LightCalc is really, I feel like, a tool best used in pre-production.
Cool. And then in terms of like knowing how much power you need, like you might need to hire a generator, or like how much these like lights are sucking up the power of where you're going, like, is that able to calculate that as well?
That's a very good point. Currently not, but that has been a feature request. So we do have a feature-based roadmap for LightCalc where people can add their own feature requests for the app. I'll give you a couple examples. One is implementing a stills feature, so not having frames per second and shutter angle, but only a shutter speed for stills photographers. The other one would be a lighting fixture comparable table where you can select 3 fixtures and compare them side by side to see how they differ in terms of output. Another one is also the power consumption, and that is a great point. That would definitely be something that we want to add to LightCalc down the road, because it would also help in, like you just mentioned, figuring out, do you need a Jenny? Can you plug it into basically the generic household circuits? So that's definitely something we're exploring to add as well as a feature down the line, that you can also calculate the power draw of these fixtures and see where you could use them.
Cool. And I think, yeah, like you said, it's a powerful tool for pre-production, and you're adding new features all the time. I've seen other kind of ones where it's like storyboarder or planner or a light thing in the 3D space where you can actually drop the lights in and move the subjects around. Is that something maybe that could be added in the future?
That's also a feature request by a lot of users. What we started out with was specifically not like a floor planner and kind of like distancing LightCalc from these 3D lighting planning softwares, because we wanted to keep it simple and to be able to easily basically run it in the browser without heavy consumption. So I used Cinetracer or Cinedesigner now, I think it's called, which obviously you have to start up every time, and which draws a lot of just processing power from the computer. It's definitely down the line, I think adding a 2D floor plan would definitely improve usability for users to really play around in real time and, position the lighting fixture more intuitively as with a slider. But for now, we specifically started with a very reduced, I would say, UI to keep it light and I guess less, how do you say, requiring less processing power on your computer.
Yeah, because that would require a lot of computing power. But also, is there a way to kind of save like a list of like you have this light and then this light and then all the settings are there, and then do you have to like write it down or export it separately onto a Google Doc or something like that? Like, how do you kind of lock in all these settings for each light or each scene and then bring it to set or send it off to the producer and say, we need all these lights?
The next feature we're going to release is the PDF export, which is going to export your entire kind of like dashboard that you currently see with ambient, subject, camera settings, key light settings, diffusion settings, which we haven't even talked about yet, and your kind of like output area over here into one PDF. That's the next feature that's going to be released. And after that, we are planning to implement a save and load feature. So every user can save their setups, like you just mentioned, and load them in again. And down the line, or after we've implemented the save and load functionality in the app, we also want to implement sharing. So that means you don't have to export a PDF and send it to the producer, but you can share, for example, a read-only view of the entire dashboard directly with your peers, colleagues, be it your gaffer, be it a Spark, or be it the producer, directly through the app. So these are the next 3 big features we want to implement: PDF export, then the save and load functionality, which you just mentioned, where users can actually save different setups, and then also the ability to share those projects with their peers.
Yeah, because it's kind of like Studio Binder or one of those things where everybody can kind of see what's happening, like see the call sheet, see it. So this would be like the DP, Gaffer, grip. Everyone can kind of see what's going to be on set before they actually turn up, or maybe they need like that list of what they can bring off the truck.
Exactly. I think that would also be a very valuable feature down the line, is adding maybe just a very simple lighting kit list, less about now stands and grip and rigging stuff, but really more about the main fixtures that are going to be used on the production. So where you can easily add those, for example, to a list of lighting fixtures that would be needed. And then everybody can see in advance what's going to be on set in terms of the main lighting fixtures.
Cool. So yeah, you say you want to talk about the diffusion tab?
Yeah, the last tab we haven't talked about yet is the diffusion tab. And that's also another great feature, I would say, of LightCalc in terms of just like learning about lighting, is the diffusion material tab. Because when I started out, I had no idea like which fabric would cut how much light. So cutting light, obviously, think of that, if you shoot your lighting source through a diffusion, which is usually a layer of fabric, it obviously is going to cut light, which means you're going to lose power and brightness by shooting your lighting source through a layer of diffusion fabric. Now, these diffusion layers or materials all vary drastically in terms of the look, but also in terms of how much light they cut. And for example, if you take magic cloth, you'll lose about 2.5 to 3 stops of light. And a stop of light, just as a quick side note, what is a stop of light? Because we can see it here in the dashboard as well. A stop of light basically is when you double the brightness. So if you go from, let's say, as a very simple example, 5,000 foot candles to 10,000 foot candles, you gained 1 stop of light. Inversely, if you halve the brightness of your light, so think of an LED fixture, like an aperture fixture, and you dim from 100% brightness to 50% brightness, you'll lose 1 stop of light. So in terms of, for example, let's take bleached muslin, you lose about 2 stops of light when you shoot your lighting fixture through that. What does that mean? That would be the equivalent of dimming your lighting fixture, if you have like an LED lighting fixture, for example, to 25%. That would be 2 stops, because first of all, you halve it from 100 to 50, and then again from 50 to 25. So you could see how adding heavier and thicker diffusion in front of your lights takes out a lot of power of the light. So that's also a great visual learning experience as LightCalc is, where you can play around with different diffusion materials, and you'll notice soon enough, if you take thicker diffusions like bleached muslin or magic cloth, for example, you need a ton more output, and you have to go get the bigger lights. Either have to go get the bigger lights, or you have to move the light extremely close to your subject, at which point it tends to become a little bit unnatural because the shadows are not parallel anymore.
So they would use that to kind of soften the light, to put all those diffusions in front of it. That's their goal, is to make less harsh shadows, but they're losing a lot more light power because they're putting something between the light and the subject.
Exactly. That's the whole point of a diffusion, is you want to soften the light. You basically want to make the source bigger and more even. And you want to soften that light before it hits your subject. And that process takes out a lot of lighting output. And thus you need to move it either very, very close, the light and the diffusion, to your subject to account for that lighting loss, or you have to go and get bigger fixtures.
Does it matter like the size? Like you got a small little softbox, and then maybe you got a 4x4, and then 8x8 and 12x12. Like, what is the kind of distance varies between each size?
Generally, obviously, it differs if you use a 4x4 or 8x8, and it mainly differs is in terms of how much you kind of like fill out of the diffusion, right? If you think about taking a diffusion, a 12x12, for example, and you put it right in front of the light, like straight to the basically reflector of the aperture, it's not going to soften the light dramatically, because you're still going to only have a small spot in the diffusion. It's going to reduce the output, but the light itself, the light source, is not going to become that much softer. Now, inversely, if you use that light source and you spread it basically across the entire diffusion, so you try to cover as much of the diffusion, then you get a bigger source and a softer light. So in LightCalc currently, the light loss is always pretty similar, but the quality of light is different, and that is hard to visualize. So in LightCalc, how it currently works is we always assume we're covering the entire diffusion. But that obviously is different in terms of the lighting quality if you use a 4x4 or an 8x8. So if you go bigger with the diffusion, you're going to get a way softer light versus when you go smaller.
And so where did you get your calculations? Is this from like the manufacturers? Like they're saying it's going to lose this much amount of light, or did you do any tests yourself?
Both. So for example, for the key lights, these are all manufacturing data. They have the output for specific modifiers. For the diffusion materials, it's mostly manufacturers as well as some tests here and there on my own. And the same accounts or is true for the color gels. So these are all manufacturer data where they tell you exactly, well, for example, half CTP is going to cut X% of lighting output.
Well, I think this is a good tool for people to use to plan out their shoots.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's a great tool for people who want to know more about or understand more about the fundamentals of lighting in terms of a physical aspect, because this all obviously is breaking it down. It's just physics. It's the physics of light. So it's a great way of learning what do different diffusion materials do, how does distance impact my lighting choice, my lighting output. And then for the more professional and industry pros, it's a great tool to really plan your shoots. A great use case I heard from a lot of gaffers is, well, they just test out before they put a light on a cherry picker and they know they have to move it, 500 feet away. Is that going to be powerful enough? Well, they can use the app to now test it out before actually putting it on the cherry picker. And obviously, if you have years of experience, if you have 20, 30 years of experience working as a gaffer, you know that certain lights at certain distances will get the job done. But if you're just starting out, I think it's a great tool to really shortcut those maybe years of experience learning on set how different lighting fixtures will help you achieve a certain look or output. And I think it's right in that niche where it's geared mostly towards people who are willing to learn and improve on their pre-production and lighting skills versus the already industry pros, or let's say 40-year industry pros who know by just putting up their hand what f-stop their key light is giving them.
Yeah, because I think it is a bit of a mystery art form in terms of like, how did they know that? Where was this? It's kind of like the mystery solved. All the numbers are there and it can all be calculated beforehand, and it will save a lot of guesswork, a lot of like going back and forth, like you said, switching out light. Oh, we need more power. We need less power. Like, whereas this, it's kind of like, you're skipping those 30 years of experience, and just instead of having to ask the guy with experience, you can ask the app or ask the calculator and put it all in there. And I think it will save a lot of time. And like you said, I think with filmmaking, you want to be prepared and you want to be professional, especially as a DP or a gaffer. You want to know your numbers. You want to make sure what you're providing the director or the DP is going to work. And, it gives more room to experiment and try new things with other parts of the filmmaking process, rather than having to, figure out the lighting in terms of, it needs to be brighter or darker. There's a lot more things that can be spent your time on. Exactly.
And that was also the main thing for me. It was never about, because I've received feedback where it was like, well, I want to now add a fill light and a kicker light. It never was about like 3-point lighting and dialing in every lighting fixture, because you're going to do that on set. But it was more about like having certainty that what you're bringing to set, the kit that you bring, is going to be enough or get the job done, right? That was really, for me, that's what I started out with as the Google Sheet. It was like, is this lighting fixture, that's going to be my main key light. We're talking about the main key light. We're not talking about like a small fill or a small kicker. It's really about the main key light. Is that going to be powerful enough if I put 3 apertures, 1200Ds, 30 feet away? Am I going to be safe? Can I be confident that we're going to have enough output for our required scene? And that was always really the goal with LightCalc. It was never about like fine tuning like every light that you're going to have on set, but give you the confidence to know that your main key light is going to get the job done. And then, like you said, you can focus on other things on set. You can focus on nuancing, dialing in your ratios. And that was, I think, always the bigger vision. And now with the feedback from the people using it, I'm just super stoked to keep building it and to keep improving it and to kind of like turn it into the best version it can be.
Awesome. Yeah, because I think it can go a lot of places, and then this is the perfect start. And like you said, actual users are going to be giving you feedback all the time, and you can continually upgrade it. That's the good thing about software. You can just make tweaks like the iPhone. It's like an update every month, they'll send you, you can update it. But yeah, like that's awesome. Congrats on making an awesome app. And I'm sure there's a lot of happy people out there that are using it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope so. And like I said, there is we have a feature-based roadmap on the landing page. You can submit ideas. If you have any ideas to improve the app, for features to add, things you want to see implemented. For example, the PDF export came from a user comparing different lighting fixtures, all of that. It's on our landing page, and you can just follow the link and submit your own ideas to make the app better and more usable for you as a user. And probably then, if you have something that you think is missing, I think a lot of other people share the same idea or same belief.
Awesome. So I'll put a link in the description with your website and your Instagram and any other kind of things you want people to follow and check it out. Download. I think it's free to try. You can play with it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We just recently added a free tier where you basically have the same view that I'm currently having. It's just limited in what you can select. So you can still play around with the distance slider. You just have a very limited amount of key lights you can select. And I think diffusion is disabled for that scenario. And you can't input custom values, but I think it's a great way to just get started to see if the tool is something for you. Fair enough it is if it's too technical at that point in your career where you say, well, it's just too overwhelming. But yeah, it's a great way to just get started, try it out, and see if it's interesting for you to utilize in pre-production or not.
Yeah, and like you said, I think it's a great place to learn. Like if it looks too intimidating, just spend, a few hours researching, figuring out what all those values mean, and then after a while it'll just click and you'll know what's happening. It's kind of like seeing the Matrix with all the numbers and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, it can be intimidating at the beginning, but like you said, I think taking the time and just playing around with it, it's already going to be a benefit, even if it's just a free tier. If you're just playing around with it, if you're just checking out what does distance do, how does that impact it, I think you can already take something away from it. And that's ultimately kind of like the goal I had with this app, is also why I wanted to bring it to film schools and universities, because I feel like it is a great way for people starting out as well to just, get a good understanding of the technicalities of lighting.
Well, thanks so much, Matt. And is there anything else you wanted to say?
If you have any questions regarding the app, you can just email us at support@lightcalc.io. I'm happy to answer all the questions that I can if they're not too complex. But yeah, if you have any questions about the tool, feel free to just message us on Instagram or wherever you find us.
Well, thanks so much, Matt. I think it's an awesome app, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Thanks for reaching out, by the way. Really appreciate that. And happy that we made it work.